Easy tips for setting boundaries. I guess first you want to know what a boundary is, right? And really, when we look at a boundary does three things. It protects us, so it protects me. My boundary protects me. My boundary contains me, meaning that it protects me, you from me, right? And then also, our boundaries are linked to our identity. People see us through our boundaries. Does that make sense? First, you have to understand what your boundary is, right? And when we're talking about what our boundary is, look at those areas in your life that you're complaining about, that you're angry about, that you're resentful for. There's probably a need for a boundary. And when we're going to set a boundary, we want to do it as succinctly as possible. We don't want to use too many words. We don't want to get too convoluted in it. We want to be very direct. And the reason that is because in relationship, we create a dynamic in a relationship where we both kind of flow over time. We learn how to interact with each other. Does that make sense? And when we're going to create a boundary, what we're going to do is we're going to change the dynamic of that relationship. And at first, the relationship is going to be a little wonky. It's going to be a little screwed up because the other person's not going to know how to behave in that with that new boundary in place. So when we're talking about setting a boundary, we're really talking about it being very clear to the point where you can't drag me down to a bunch of rabbit holes when you're trying to fight this boundary. So if I say, I can't allow you to use my car again, and if you use my car again, you and I aren't going to be friends, right? That's just a boundary. If I start going on the reasons why you can't use my car again, then you're going to fight me on all of those reasons. And you're going to say, well, what about this and what about that? And I don't want you to have to drag me into a power struggle or have me going down into a bunch of rabbit holes when I'm just really trying to set a clear boundary. So first off, again, make it short and sweet and make it to the point. The other thing, though, is we have to recognize that the person that we're setting the boundary with isn't going to like it a lot of the time. And we just have to be prepared for that. We have to be prepared for the person to push back on the boundary a little bit. That's why we keep it short and sweet. And that's why also when people push back on that boundary, we don't get into those power struggles. So keep it simple. Recognize it's going to piss the other person off possibly. And then also be prepared to reinforce the boundary. Boundaries are not about me believing that you're going to honor my boundary. A boundary is me believing I'm going to enforce it when you cross it. That makes sense? Say we're talking on the phone. I really want to have this conversation with you, but if you're going to continue to scream and yell at me and call me names, I'm going to hang up. And then when the person says, well, F you, this, click, and that's my boundary. And then they call back and they start screaming and yelling, click. Now, they're going to do one of two things. They're going to continue to get pissed off, and eventually they're going to burn themselves out. Or they're going to really realize, wow, you really mean it. I better try and communicate a little bit differently here. Now, people start thinking that a boundary is a threat. This is not a threat. I'm not saying if you don't start talking to me nicely, I'm going to punch you in the mouth. That's not appropriate, and that's not relational. Again, I need to protect me from you. But also, I need to protect you from me. So if you keep on the phone, if you keep yelling at me, screaming at me, and calling me names, I'm probably going to start doing the same thing to you, right? And I have to be mindful that I'm capable of doing that, and I don't want to get to that level. So I know where my boundary is with me as far as how much, say, verbal abuse I can take. And if it crosses that line, then maybe I'm going to start verbally abusing you also. So that's another reason why we want to set that boundary. You know, somebody that does close talking that's like kind of in your face all the time? We know that person by that behavior. I'm a real touchy-feely person and I like to give hugs, and people know that I'm touchy-feely, and that can be a boundary violation. If I don't ask permission to pat you on the back, that could be a boundary violation.